more acidic your blood becomes. So acidosis is related to an increase in carbon dioxide. What if we increase that blood pH beyond 7.45? Alkalosis, good. Well, if acidosis is related to an increase in carbon dioxide, what is alkalosis related to? A decrease in carbon dioxide. Okay. This is a sneak preview of the respiratory system, and it's also a sneak preview of acid-base balance, because the rate of breathing is actually related to how much CO2 that you've got in your bloodstream. Most people breathe between, say, 12 and 15 breaths per minute, just sitting there resting at your desk. But if you get really excited and you get really nervous or upset about something, you start breathing really fast. It's called hyperventilation. If you're hyperventilating, you're blowing off too much of your carbon dioxide, and that sends you into this condition here called alkalosis. So you might want to associate alkalosis with hyperventilation.
So when people, when they say breathing is bad, is that why do they say that?
If you're hyperventilating, you're nervous, you can't calm down, you're blowing off excess CO2 that needs to be in your bloodstream. If you all of a sudden put a paper bag up to your mouth, you're going to inhale in your own exhaust, putting your CO2 back into your body, taking your blood pH from an alkaline position back down to the normal state. So they want you to breathe in until you restore your breathing rate back down. If alkalosis can be caused by hyperventilation, guess what causes acidosis? Hypoventilation. People with emphysema and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, may have this condition. So acidosis is linked to hypoventilation. People, go ahead, Julie. Yes, yes. Because it can rob you of your oxygen levels, which is another factor here. So it will also change your blood pressure and then change your heart rate and your breathing rate as a result.
So your blood could be more acidic.
Yeah, because it's putting things like carbon monoxide in your bloodstream, so it's, and in fact it actually increases your breathing rate and your blood pressure and your heart rate. Yeah. Alright, let's say we've had somebody fall and hit their head. And the portion of their head that they hit was the vasomotor center that controls, say, breathing rate. We know that that's partly a respiratory center and partly a cardiovascular center. Alright, so you've got somebody right now who is hypoventilating. Okay? The chemoreceptors are also in your carotid arteries and in the aorta. And the chemoreceptors are taking information to that vasomotor center that says, help, the carbon dioxide levels are currently increasing. What does the vasomotor center come back and do? How do we fix this kind of problem? Breathing, yeah. Increase your breathing. And if it's possible, then what will happen to your heart rate and your blood pressure? Increase. Because the faster we can circulate that blood, get gas out, exactly. Do that gas exchange in the lungs and get that blood moving more quickly. So exactly right. So low pHs, anything below 7.35, an increase in carbon dioxide, those two things are linked together. And if you are hypoventilating, it will speed up your breathing rate, it will speed up your blood pressure and your heart rate to help move that gas out. Okay? I about cut my finger off about a year or so ago. I was cutting up frozen chicken, and I drove myself to the urgent care. By the time I got there, you know, I was tingling. I was in hyperventilation, right? Okay, so what was my vasomotor center doing to my heart rate and my blood pressure?
There was kind of a calm it down, but you weren't listening.
I wasn't listening, right. I was in hyperventilation. I was losing too much carbon dioxide. So what my vasomotor center tells my heart rate to do, and my lower slow, is telling me to calm down, right? So in people who are hyperventilating or who have too much CO2, or sorry, too little CO2, what we're going to do is we're going to tell that heart rate to decrease, blood pressure to decrease, and hey, I might as well go ahead and tell you, what's it going to do to your breathing rate?
Slow it down.
Slow it down. Slow everything down, and you will keep more carbon dioxide. And if you keep more carbon dioxide, you slowly become more acidic, dropping back into your normal range. So here's the trigger. An increase in CO2 is akin to acidosis. This will tell your vasomotor center to speed things up. We're going back up to the normal range, right? So what we're going to do here to fix it is increase heart rate and increase blood pressure. So see, we're too low, we're going to go back up to our normal range, and the way that we do that is through increasing heart rate and increasing blood pressure. If we're too high, in other words, if we're in alkalosis, and we have too little carbon dioxide in our bloodstream, we want to come back down. So notice that we're going to come back down by decreasing blood pressure and decreasing heart rate. I'm going to put the word fix here, and in fancy terms we should be saying compensation, because the way that you compensate for a decreased blood pH, or the way that you compensate for an increased blood pH is by altering blood pressure and altering that heart rate. So again, it's that vasomotor center. So same picture, instead of having baroreceptors this time we're dealing with chemoreceptors.
Are they both trying to serve the same purpose, they just respond to different things?
Yes, the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors, their job is the same, to alter blood pressure and heart rate, but you're right. Baroreceptor responds to the pressures, chemoreceptor responds to chemical composition. You're right, but the goal is the same. Okay. One more thing you might notice down there on the bottom of your page, I'm under the bullet point that says chemoreceptors. You might have noticed I've mentioned to you the increase in CO2 and the decrease in pH. But I haven't yet mentioned to you the change in oxygen level. If we increase CO2, quite likely we are going to decrease oxygen. So let's add that to the list down here. You never knew you were going to use Bio-210 so much, but here we go again. What organelle is responsible for creating ATP? Mitochondria. Glucose and oxygen come into the mitochondria. What comes out? CO2, ATP, and water. Okay? So if you're using up a bunch of oxygen, you're quite likely creating a bunch of ATP, and there's where the increase in CO2 is coming from. So if you don't have enough oxygen in your bloodstream, that is also a trigger to increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, and to circulate that blood more quickly and do the gas exchange at the lungs more quickly. So these three are triggers. Acidosis situation, high levels of carbon dioxide, or low levels of oxygen will trigger your vasomotor center to fix it by increasing heart rate and increasing blood pressure. Likewise, low levels of carbon dioxide are related to what levels of oxygen? High levels. In this situation, your body may not be making a whole bunch of ATP, so a lot of oxygen is still in circulation. So if you have too much oxygen in circulation, that's quite likely linked to low levels of CO2 and alkalosis. And again, the fix or compensation is to decrease heart rate and to decrease that blood pressure. This is a sneak preview of respiratory systems because, of course, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, oxygen, and carbon dioxide levels are related to what the respiratory system is doing. So if this is kind of seeming like we're reaching into the future, we are. We're reaching into chapter 20 for just a moment and borrowing a couple of concepts. I have placed two little animations on D2L for you, and I know they're flash files, and they're kind of hard to use unless you have some way to open them. So I wanted to show them here for just a moment. Okay, the first animation here deals with baroreceptor and pressure control.
Increased blood pressure stretches the carotid arteries and aorta, causing the baroreceptors to increase their basal rate of action potential generation. Action potentials are conducted by the glossopharyngeal and vagus nerves to the cardioregulatory and vasomotor centers in the medulla oblongata. As a result of increased stimulation from the baroreceptors, the cardioregulatory center increases parasympathetic stimulation to the heart, which decreases the heart rate. Also, as a result of the increased stimulation from the baroreceptors, the cardiovascular center decreases sympathetic stimulation to the heart, which decreases heart rate and stroke volume. The vasomotor center decreases sympathetic stimulation to blood vessels, causing vasodilation. The vasodilation, along with the decreased heart rate and decreased stroke volume, bring the elevated blood pressure back toward normal. If the initial problem were a decrease in blood pressure, the activities and effects of the baroreceptors, cardiovascular center, and vasomotor center would be the opposite of what is illustrated.
They used all their fancy language. The good thing we walked through it first, but they essentially kind of encapsulate the same issue here. Increased pressure, the job of that vasomotor center is to decrease the pressure, and all we're looking at the mechanism of how that's done.
Increased blood pressures.
Let's also take a look at the chemoreceptor.
Chemoreceptors in the carotid and aortic bodies monitor blood oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH. Impulses from these chemoreceptors are conducted to the control centers for heart and blood vessels via the glossopharyngeal and vagus nerves. Chemoreceptors in the medulla oblongata monitor blood carbon dioxide and pH. Decreased blood oxygen, increased carbon dioxide, or decreased pH decrease parasympathetic stimulation of the heart, which increases the heart rate. Decreased blood oxygen, increased carbon dioxide, and decreased pH increase sympathetic stimulation of the heart, which increases heart rate and stroke volume. Increased sympathetic stimulation of blood vessels increases vasoconstriction.
Good thing we talked through that first, and that's fast, isn't it? Okay. So the bottom line here, let me go back to our PowerPoint for just a moment. The bottom line is this: if you're noticing all the things we've talked about so far, if there is some need to increase blood pressure, then look what follows along. Cardiac output, heart rate, stroke volume all follow suit. So if one increases, the rest of them increase in turn. Likewise, if blood pressure decreases, everybody else comes along for the ride. Cardiac output, heart rate, and stroke volume also are going to be